Naomi adjusted the hem of her threadbare dress as she rushed into the small kitchen of their one-room house. The early morning sunlight poured through the cracks in the wooden shutters, illuminating the faces of her 3 children. Amara, her eldest at 10 years old, was already feeding baby Eliana mashed bananas while 6-year-old Liam sat cross-legged on the floor, organizing his schoolbooks with precision. "Breakfast will be ready soon," Naomi said, her voice betraying exhaustion. She had just come off a night shift at the local diner, her feet aching from hours of standing. "Take your time, Mama," Amara replied with the maturity of someone far older than her years. "We're fine." Naomi felt a pang of guilt as she watched Amara juggle the roles of a child and caregiver. But what could she do? Life had been unkind, and Marcus, their father, had walked out when Eliana was born. While Naomi fried a few slices of bread, her mind wandered. She loved her children fiercely, but resented the monotony of their lives. It felt like every day was a repetition of the last, working, scraping by, and barely making ends meet. The weight of responsibility was suffocating, and lately, the idea of escaping it all had crept into her thoughts. "Liam, hurry up," Amara said, wiping Eliana's face. "We need to get to school on time today." Naomi glanced at them and felt a mix of pride and sadness. Her children deserved better, a real home, proper meals, and a mother who wasn't constantly worn down by life. As she plated the meager breakfast, there was a knock at the door. Naomi froze. She wasn't expecting anyone. Opening it cautiously, she was greeted by Marcus's old friend, Marcus, charismatic, smooth-talking, and dressed in clothes far too expensive for their neighborhood. "Naomi," he said, flashing a dazzling smile. "Got a minute?" The tension in the air was thick. Naomi's heart raced as Marcus leaned casually against the doorframe. The children watched silently, sensing the shift in their mother's mood. Naomi knew this visit would change everything. She just didn't know how much. Naomi's hands trembled as she closed the door behind her, leaving the children inside. She stepped onto the small porch, her gaze fixed on Marcus. His charm was undeniable, his confidence intoxicating. "Marcus, why are you here?" Naomi asked, folding her arms to mask her nerves. "I heard about your struggles," Marcus replied, his voice smooth as silk. "I thought I'd drop by and see how you're doing." "You deserve better than this, Naomi." His words struck a chord she didn't want to acknowledge. For years, she had buried her own desires beneath the weight of her children's needs. Now here was Marcus, promising something different, a life that wasn't filled with constant sacrifice. "You don't understand," Naomi said, shaking her head. "I can't just walk away from my life." Marcus leaned closer, his eyes piercing. "Maybe it's time you stopped living for everyone else and started living for yourself. Think about it, Naomi. No more struggle, no more pain. Just you and me, building a life together." Inside, Amara peeked through a crack in the door. She couldn't hear everything, but she saw the way her mother's defenses wavered under Marcus's words. She knew her mother was tired, but the thought of being abandoned filled her with dread. "Marcus, Naomi hesitated. His hand brushed hers, and for the first time in years, she felt a flicker of hope, however misguided it was. "Think about it," Marcus said, stepping away. "I'll be back tomorrow. You don't have to decide now." Naomi stood on the porch long after he left, her mind racing. Inside, Amara closed the door quietly, her heart sinking as she hugged her siblings tightly. The next day dawned with an eerie stillness. Naomi moved through the house like a ghost, her thoughts consumed by Marcus's proposition. The children noticed her distracted state, but Amara was the only one who dared to speak up. "Mama, are you okay?" Amara asked cautiously. Naomi forced a smile. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just thinking about a lot of things." But Amara wasn't convinced. She watched her mother closely as Naomi packed their lunches with trembling hands and avoided eye contact. Amara's instincts screamed that something was wrong. Later that evening, Marcus returned. This time, Naomi didn't hesitate. She stepped outside, leaving the children with strict instructions to stay inside. Amara disobeyed, creeping toward the door to listen. "I've made my decision," Naomi said, her voice steady but laced with pain. "I'll go with you." Amara's breath caught in her throat. She pushed the door open, her eyes wide with disbelief. "Mama, what are you saying?" Naomi turned, tears streaming down her face. "Amara, I love you and your siblings, but I can't do this anymore. I'm tired. I need to think about my own life for once. You can't leave us." Amara cried, her voice breaking. "We need you." Marcus stepped forward, placing a hand on Naomi's shoulder. "They'll be fine," he said dismissively. They're tough kids. Naomi couldn't meet Amara's eyes. She turned away, walking toward Marcus's car. Amara ran after her, but Marcus blocked her path. Don't worry, kid, he said with a smirk. She'll be happier this way. Amara watched helplessly as her mother got into the car and drove away, leaving her and her siblings standing by the roadside under the fading light. The weight of responsibility fell squarely on Amara's young shoulders as tears streamed down her face. We'll be okay, she whispered, pulling Liam and Eliana close. We have to be. The night air was heavy as Amara stood frozen by the roadside, clutching Liam and Eliana. Her mother's car disappeared into the distance, leaving behind a suffocating silence. Liam tugged at her sleeve, his voice trembling. Where's Mama going? She's coming back, right? Amara's throat tightened. How could she explain the unthinkable to a 6-year-old? She just needs some time, she said, forcing herself to sound brave. But we'll be okay, Liam. I promise. Eliana whimpered in Amara's arms, too young to understand but sensing the unease. Amara scanned their surroundings, a desolate stretch of road bordered by fields and trees. They were miles away from home, alone and vulnerable. We need to move, Amara said, her voice firm despite her fear. She took Liam's hand and adjusted Eliana on her hip. We'll find somewhere safe. As they walked, the reality of their situation began to sink in. Amara's mind raced with questions. Where would they sleep? How would they eat? What if something happened to them? But she couldn't afford to let her siblings see her fear. Hours passed before they reached the outskirts of a small town. Exhausted and hungry, they huddled under a bus stop shelter. Liam leaned against Amara, his eyes drooping. I'm tired, he mumbled. I know, Amara said softly, brushing his hair back. We'll rest here for now. I'll figure something out in the morning. As the night stretched on, Amara stayed awake, watching over her siblings. She felt the weight of responsibility pressing down on her like never before. At 10 years old, she had become a mother, protector, and provider all in one. The darkness seemed endless as Amara sat at the bus stop, her arms wrapped protectively around Liam and Eliana. The cool night air bit at their skin, and the occasional sound of passing cars made her jump. She was exhausted but couldn't allow herself to rest. Eliana stirred, letting out a soft cry. Mama, she whimpered, reaching out with tiny hands. Amara's heart broke, but she quickly kissed her baby sister's forehead. Shoo, Ellie, I'm here. Mama will be back soon, she lied, her voice steady despite the lump in her throat. Liam shifted in his sleep, his small body curling closer to Amara for warmth. She wished she could provide more for them, blankets, food, a real bed. But for now, all she could offer was her presence and the promise of better days ahead. As the hours dragged on, Amara's mind wandered to memories of happier times. She remembered when their family had been whole, before Marcus came into their lives and disrupted everything. Her mother had once been full of laughter and love. What had changed? The first rays of dawn broke through the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of orange and pink. Amara's eyelids felt heavy, but she forced herself to stay awake. The town was waking up, and she needed to find help before the streets got busy. Liam, she whispered, shaking him gently. Wake up. We have to go. Liam rubbed his eyes and looked up at her groggily. Where are we going? Somewhere better, Amara replied, determination hardening her voice. She lifted Eliana onto her hip and took Liam's hand. As they walked into the town, she prayed silently for a miracle. Amara's steps slowed as they reached the town square. The bustling streets were filled with people heading to work, vendors setting up stalls, and children running to school. She felt out of place, just a little girl with 2 younger siblings and nowhere to go. She spotted a bakery with a help-wanted sign in the window. The smell of freshly baked bread made her stomach growl, and she hesitated before stepping inside. Behind the counter stood a kind-looking elderly woman with silver hair tied back in a neat bun. The woman's eyes softened as she noticed Amara and her siblings. Good morning, dear, the woman said gently. Can I help you? Amara swallowed her pride and stepped forward. I'm looking for work, she said, her voice trembling. Anything at all. I can clean or wash dishes. I just need to feed my brother and sister. The woman's expression shifted from curiosity to concern. How old are you, child? 10, Amara admitted, holding her head high. But I can work hard. I promise. The woman glanced at Liam and Eliana, her heart breaking at the sight of their tired faces. What happened to your parents? She asked softly. Amara hesitated, then decided on a half-truth. Our mother had to leave. It's just us now. The woman nodded, understanding enough. "Wait here," she said, disappearing into the back. When she returned, she handed Amara a small bag filled with bread and fruit. "Take this for now," she said, "and come back tomorrow. I'll see what I can do." Tears filled Amara's eyes as she thanked the woman. It wasn't much, but it was enough to give her hope. Amara and her siblings sat on a bench in the park, sharing the food the kind woman had given them. Every bite felt like a lifeline, restoring a bit of strength to their weary bodies. Liam, his cheeks puffed with bread, looked up at Amara with a small smile. "Do you think we can go back to the bakery tomorrow?" he asked. Amara nodded, wiping crumbs from Eliana's chin. "Yes. The lady said we could come back. Maybe she'll let me work, and we can get more food." Deep inside, Amara knew this was only a temporary fix. They needed a long-term solution, a place to stay, a way to survive. But for now, she focused on one step at a time. As the sun set, Amara spotted an old playground nearby. The swings creaked in the wind, and the slide was rusted, but it was better than sleeping on the streets. She led Liam and Eliana there, helping them settle into a corner under the slide where they would be somewhat shielded from the night. "Stay close to me," Amara whispered, pulling them both into her arms. She watched the stars appear one by one, her mind racing with plans for the next day. Amara didn't allow herself to cry, even though the weight of their situation pressed down on her like a heavy stone. "We'll get through this," she murmured to herself. "I'll make sure of it." For the first time since their mother left, Amara felt a spark of determination. She might only be a child, but she was ready to fight for her family. The next morning, Amara returned to the bakery, Liam and Eliana in tow. The elderly woman greeted them warmly, her eyes lingering on the children's tired faces. "I've been thinking about your situation," the woman said as she handed Amara an apron. "You can help me around the bakery, cleaning, washing dishes, whatever you can manage. In return, I'll give you food for your siblings and a little money." Amara's eyes lit up with gratitude. "Thank you so much, ma'am. I'll do my best. You can call me Mrs. Hazel," the woman said with a gentle smile. Amara got to work immediately, scrubbing counters and sweeping the floor with a determination that impressed Mrs. Hazel. Liam and Eliana sat quietly in the corner, munching on bread Mrs. Hazel had given them. As the day went on, Mrs. Hazel asked Amara more about her family. Amara avoided the painful details, focusing instead on her determination to keep her siblings safe. Mrs. Hazel listened without pressing, her heart aching for the children. When the day ended, Mrs. Hazel handed Amara a small envelope with a few bills and coins inside. "It's not much," she said, "but it should help." Tears welled up in Amara's eyes as she accepted the envelope. "Thank you, Mrs. Hazel. This means everything to us." Mrs. Hazel placed a hand on Amara's shoulder. "You're a brave girl, Amara. Don't lose that strength." As they left the bakery that evening, Amara felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time since their mother left, she believed they might just make it through. Over the next few weeks, Amara settled into a routine. She worked at the bakery every day, scrubbing floors, cleaning dishes, and occasionally helping with small tasks like rolling dough. Mrs. Hazel always made sure the children had food and a safe place to rest while Amara worked. Liam began to adapt to their new life, though he often asked when they could go home. Amara always gave the same answer: soon. She didn't have the heart to tell him the truth, that home was no longer an option. One day, Mrs. Hazel approached Amara with an idea. "I've been thinking," she said, wiping her hands on her apron. "There's a small room above the bakery that I don't use anymore. It's not much, but it has a bed and a little stove. You and your siblings could stay there." Amara's heart swelled with gratitude. "Really? Mrs. Hazel, that would mean so much to us." Mrs. Hazel smiled. "It's yours as long as you keep working hard and take care of your brother and sister." That evening, Amara and the children moved into the tiny room. It was cramped and worn, but to them, it felt like a palace. For the first time in weeks, they had a roof over their heads and a bed to sleep in. As Amara tucked Liam and Eliana into the bed, she sat by the window, staring out at the bustling town below. She felt a renewed sense of purpose. They were far from out of the woods, but for the first time, she believed they could build a better future. Living above the bakery brought a sense of stability that Amara hadn't felt in weeks. Though the room was small, it was clean and warm, a sanctuary compared to the cold streets they had endured. Every morning, Amara woke up before the sun rose to start her chores at the bakery. She swept floors, wiped counters, and helped with the morning rush, always eager to show Mrs. Hazel her gratitude. Liam often helped where he could, stacking trays or carrying light bags of flour, while Eliana played quietly in the corner with a small doll Mrs. Hazel had gifted her. "Amara, you're doing a fine job," Mrs. Hazel said one afternoon, watching as the young girl carefully arranged loaves of bread on a display rack. "You've got a good head on your shoulders. Have you ever thought about going back to school?" The question caught Amara off guard. She missed school terribly, her friends, her teachers, the chance to learn. But she shook her head. "I can't," she said firmly. "If I go to school, who'll take care of Liam and Eliana?" Mrs. Hazel frowned but didn't push further. She admired Amara's dedication to her siblings, but worried about the toll it was taking on the girl. That night, as the children lay sleeping, Amara sat by the window, gazing at the stars. She thought about Mrs. Hazel's words, longing for the life she had before everything fell apart. But she knew that her first priority had to be her family. "No matter what, I'll make sure we're okay," she whispered to herself, the quiet resolve in her voice unwavering. The bakery's steady rhythm brought structure to their days, but Amara's life was far from easy. Between working long hours, caring for her siblings, and ensuring they had enough to eat, she barely had a moment to herself. Yet she never complained. One morning, Liam approached her with a worried expression. "Amara," he said softly, "the kids at the park said school is starting soon. Will we go back this year?" Amara paused, the weight of his words sinking in. She knew how much Liam loved school, and the thought of depriving him of an education broke her heart. But the reality of their situation left no room for such luxuries. "I don't know, Liam," she admitted, brushing his hair gently. "Maybe next year, okay? Right now, we have to focus on staying safe and healthy." Liam's face fell, but he nodded, trusting his sister's judgment. Amara watched him walk back to his toys, guilt gnawing at her. She wanted more for him, for all of them, but she couldn't see a way to make it happen. That evening, Mrs. Hazel noticed Amara's quiet mood. "What's on your mind, child?" she asked, placing a warm hand on Amara's shoulder. Amara hesitated before opening up. "Liam wants to go back to school," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I can't afford to send him. I barely make enough to feed us." Mrs. Hazel nodded thoughtfully. "We'll figure something out," she said. "Education is important, and no child should have to miss out on it." Amara didn't know how Mrs. Hazel planned to help, but she felt a glimmer of hope. For the first time, she allowed herself to imagine a future where her siblings could thrive. The next week, Mrs. Hazel approached Amara with a solution. "I've spoken to the headmaster at the local school," she said. "They're willing to waive the fees for Liam and Eliana if I write a recommendation. And as for supplies, we can figure that out together." Amara's eyes widened in disbelief. "You'd do that for us?" Mrs. Hazel smiled warmly. "Of course. You've worked hard, Amara. You deserve a little help." When Amara told Liam the news, his face lit up with pure joy. "Really? I can go back to school?" "Yes," Amara said, tears welling in her eyes. "You'll start next week." Eliana, too young to fully understand, clapped her hands and giggled at her brother's excitement. The following days were filled with preparation. Mrs. Hazel helped Amara gather second-hand uniforms and books, and Liam eagerly counted down the days until his first day back. Amara couldn't help but feel a swell of pride as she watched her brother's enthusiasm. On the morning of Liam's first day, Amara walked him to the school gate, holding his hand tightly. "Be good, okay? And work hard." "I will," Liam promised, his eyes shining with determination. As she watched him walk into the schoolyard, Amara felt a mix of emotions, pride, relief, and a lingering sadness. She couldn't join him in the classroom, but knowing that he had a chance at a better future was enough to keep her going. That evening, Liam came home bubbling with stories about his new teacher and classmates. Amara listened intently, her heart swelling with hope. Perhaps their struggles weren't over, but for the first time, she believed they were heading in the right direction. Liam's return to school breathed life into their small family. Each morning, Amara woke him early, ironing his second-hand uniform and packing a simple lunch of bread and fruit. Liam's enthusiasm was infectious, filling the tiny room with chatter about his teacher, his new friends, and the lessons he was learning. One evening, as Liam sat on the floor working on his homework, he looked up at Amara. "Miss Hazel said I'm smart," he announced proudly. "Maybe I can be a teacher when I grow up." Amara smiled, her chest swelling with pride. "You can be anything you want, Liam," she said, ruffling his hair. "You just have to keep working hard." Liam's success in school reminded Amara of what she had sacrificed. She missed the thrill of learning, the feeling of possibility that came with each new lesson. But every time she saw the light in Liam's eyes, she knew she had made the right choice. Meanwhile, Eliana, now 3, was growing curious and adventurous. She toddled around the bakery while Amara worked, often bringing a smile to Mrs. Hazel's face with her giggles and antics. "She's a bright little thing," Mrs. Hazel said one afternoon, watching Eliana play with a rolling pin. "She'll go far, just like her brother." Amara nodded, her heart full. No matter how hard life became, her siblings were her anchor, giving her the strength to keep going. As the weeks turned into months, Amara began to dream of a future where they could leave the bakery room behind and find a real home. She didn't know how they'd get there, but she was determined to make it happen. One crisp morning, as Amara was cleaning the bakery's front window, a man walked in. He was tall and rugged, with a kind smile that immediately put her at ease. He looked around before approaching the counter. "Is Mrs. Hazel here?" he asked. Amara nodded and went to fetch her employer. From the back, Mrs. Hazel greeted the man warmly. "David, what brings you here, dear?" "I heard about your new helper," he said, glancing at Amara. "I wanted to meet her." Amara shifted uncomfortably under his gaze. "I'm Amara," she said, her voice steady despite her nervousness. David smiled. "Mrs. Hazel told me about you and your siblings. You're a remarkable young lady." Amara blinked, surprised by the compliment. "Thank you," she said softly. David, it turned out, was a local carpenter and a longtime friend of Mrs. Hazel. He often did odd jobs for the bakery, fixing shelves and repairing equipment. Over the next few weeks, he became a familiar presence, always offering a kind word or a helping hand. One evening, as he was leaving, he stopped to speak to Amara. "If you ever need anything, a repair, some help, just let me know," he said. Amara hesitated, then nodded. "Thank you, Mr. David." Though she didn't fully trust him yet, Amara couldn't deny that his kindness was a welcome addition to their lives. As time passed, the bakery became more than just a workplace for Amara. It was a second home. Mrs. Hazel treated the children like family, and even David's occasional visits brought a sense of warmth and stability. One afternoon, Mrs. Hazel surprised them with a treat. "You've been working so hard, Amara," she said, pulling a tray of cookies from the oven. "It's time for a little fun." The children's eyes lit up as Mrs. Hazel set the tray on the table. Amara couldn't remember the last time they'd had something as indulgent as fresh-baked cookies. "Go ahead," Mrs. Hazel urged. "You've earned it." Liam and Eliana dove in, giggling as they savored the warm, gooey treats. Amara took a bite, closing her eyes as the sweet taste melted on her tongue. For a moment, it felt like all their troubles had disappeared. David stopped by later that evening, carrying a small wooden box. "I made something for the little one," he said, handing it to Eliana. Eliana opened the box to reveal a beautifully carved toy horse. She squealed with delight, hugging it tightly. "Thank you, Mr. David," she said, her voice high with excitement. David chuckled. "You're welcome, little one." Watching her siblings laugh and play, Amara felt a rare sense of peace. Life was still hard, but moments like these reminded her of the beauty in their resilience. As she tucked Liam and Eliana into bed that night, Amara whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. They weren't just surviving, they were beginning to live again. As time passed, the bakery became more than just a workplace for Amara. It was a second home. Mrs. Hazel treated the children like family, and even David's occasional visits brought a sense of warmth and stability. One afternoon, Mrs. Hazel surprised them with a treat. "You've been working so hard, Amara," she said, pulling a tray of cookies from the oven. "It's time for a little fun." The children's eyes lit up as Mrs. Hazel set the tray on the table. Amara couldn't remember the last time they'd had something as indulgent as fresh-baked cookies. "Go ahead," Mrs. Hazel urged. "You've earned it." Liam and Eliana dove in, giggling as they savored the warm, gooey treats. Amara took a bite, closing her eyes as the sweet taste melted on her tongue. For a moment, it felt like all their troubles had disappeared. David stopped by later that evening, carrying a small wooden box. "I made something for the little one," he said, handing it to Eliana. Eliana opened the box to reveal a beautifully carved toy horse. She squealed with delight, hugging it tightly. "Thank you, Mr. David," she said, her voice high with excitement. David chuckled. "You're welcome, little one." Watching her siblings laugh and play, Amara felt a rare sense of peace. Life was still hard, but moments like these reminded her of the beauty in their resilience. As she tucked Liam and Eliana into bed that night, Amara whispered a silent prayer of gratitude. They weren't just surviving, they were beginning to live again. One evening, after the bakery had closed for the day, Amara sat with Mrs. Hazel, sipping a cup of warm tea. The children were upstairs, fast asleep, their laughter from earlier still echoing in her mind. "You know, Amara," Mrs. Hazel began, her voice thoughtful, "you're a bright young girl. Have you ever thought about what you want for yourself in the future?" Amara hesitated. She had spent so long focusing on her siblings that she hadn't allowed herself to dream. But Mrs. Hazel's question awakened something in her, a longing she had buried deep. "I used to want to be a teacher," Amara admitted. "I loved school. I always thought I'd help kids learn one day." Mrs. Hazel smiled warmly. "There's no reason you can't still do that. You're young, and you have the determination. It might take time, but it's possible." Amara nodded, though doubt lingered in her mind. How could she dream of such things when her siblings still needed her? Later that night, as she watched Liam excitedly complete his homework, a thought struck her. Perhaps her dreams didn't have to come at the expense of her siblings' futures. If she could find a way to balance both, maybe they could all achieve something greater. For the first time in years, Amara allowed herself to hope. Not just for her family, but for herself. The calm in their lives was disrupted one stormy evening when heavy rain battered the town. The tiny room above the bakery leaked in places, forcing Amara to place pots and pans to catch the water. As the thunder roared, Eliana clung to Amara, her little body trembling. "It's so loud," she whimpered. Amara held her close, whispering soothing words. Liam sat nearby, bravely pretending not to be afraid, though his wide eyes betrayed him. Downstairs, Mrs. Hazel and David worked quickly to secure the bakery from flooding. Amara watched as they moved with urgency, their teamwork reassuring. "Amara," David called, looking up the stairs. "Do you need help with the children?" "No, we're fine," she replied, though she wasn't sure how true that was. The storm lasted through the night, leaving them all exhausted by morning. When the rain finally stopped, Amara ventured outside to assess the damage. The streets were littered with debris, and the bakery's roof had suffered several leaks. "We'll have to close for a few days to make repairs," Mrs. Hazel said with a sigh. Amara's heart sank. Without work, they wouldn't have any income for food. But before she could panic, David stepped in. "I'll fix the roof," he said firmly. "And Amara, I have some extra work at my shop if you're interested." Amara nodded, grateful for his kindness. "Thank you, Mr. David. I'll do whatever you need." Even in the face of challenges, their little community banded together, proving that they were stronger as a team. Working at David's carpentry shop was a new experience for Amara. She spent her days sanding wood, organizing tools, and learning the basics of craftsmanship. Though the work was tough, she appreciated the opportunity to earn extra money for her family. "You're a quick learner," David said one afternoon, watching as Amara carefully polished a piece of furniture. "Have you ever thought about picking up a trade?" Amara shook her head. "I've never had time to think about anything besides my siblings." "Well," David said, handing her a set of tools, "it's never too late to start. You've got talent." Amara smiled, feeling a spark of pride. For the first time, she realized she had skills beyond her role as caretaker. Meanwhile, Liam was excelling in school. His teacher sent a note home, praising his enthusiasm and intelligence. "He's a joy to have in class," the note read. "You should be very proud." When Amara showed Liam the note, he beamed with pride. "See, Amara? I told you I'm going to be a teacher." Amara hugged him tightly, her heart swelling with love. "I'm so proud of you, Liam," she said. Back at the bakery, Mrs. Hazel's repairs were nearly complete, and life slowly began to return to normal. Amara's hard work at the carpentry shop helped cover their expenses during the closure, proving to herself that she could rise to any challenge. With every passing day, Amara felt stronger, more capable. She was no longer just surviving. She was building a life for her family, one step at a time. Liam's excitement about school soon turned to anxiety when his teacher announced the class's first test. Though he enjoyed learning, the idea of being judged on paper made him nervous. "Amara," he said one evening as they sat at the small table in their room, "what if I fail?" Amara looked at him, her heart aching at his doubt. "You won't fail, Liam," she said firmly. "You've been working so hard. Just focus on what you've learned, and you'll do great." To help him prepare, Amara borrowed a few old textbooks from Mrs. Hazel. Each night after work, she sat with Liam, going over math problems and vocabulary words. Eliana would sit nearby, doodling on scraps of paper, occasionally chiming in with her own creative answers. When the test day arrived, Amara walked Liam to school as usual, squeezing his hand tightly at the gate. "Remember, it's just a piece of paper," she said. "What matters is that you try your best." Liam nodded, his confidence bolstered by her encouragement. That afternoon, he came running home, waving his test paper in the air. "Amara, I got a 95, he exclaimed, his face glowing with pride. Amara hugged him tightly. "I knew you could do it," she said, her voice thick with emotion. His success was more than just a high score. It was proof that their sacrifices were paying off. Liam's success at school reignited Amara's dreams of returning to her own education. One evening, as she was helping Mrs. Hazel close the bakery, she hesitated before speaking. "Mrs. Hazel," she began, "do you think it's too late for me to go back to school?" Mrs. Hazel looked at her with a mixture of surprise and admiration. "Of course not, dear," she said. "It's never too late to learn. You're smart and capable. You'd thrive if given the chance." Amara smiled, though doubt lingered in her heart. How could she balance school with work and caring for her siblings? Still, the idea planted a seed of hope. A few days later, Mrs. Hazel handed her a pamphlet. "There's a night school program in town," she said. "It's for people who've had to leave school early. I think you should look into it." Amara took the pamphlet, her fingers trembling. The thought of sitting in a classroom again, of pursuing her dreams, was both thrilling and terrifying. That night, she read the pamphlet over and over, imagining what her life could look like if she took this step. But she knew it wasn't just about her. It was about building a better future for Liam and Eliana, too. "I'll think about it," she told herself, though deep down, she knew she wanted to try. While Amara and her siblings were finding their footing, their mother, Celeste, was spiraling deeper into regret. The man she had abandoned them for had left her, and the weight of her choices hung heavily on her shoulders. Celeste wandered the streets aimlessly, haunted by memories of her children. She recalled Liam's infectious laughter, Eliana's tiny hands grasping hers, and Amara's fierce determination to protect her siblings. "Why did I leave them?" she whispered to herself, tears streaming down her face. One day, while walking through a market, she overheard two women talking about a local bakery. "Mrs. Hazel's shop is doing so well," one said. "She's even helping that young girl and her siblings. Such a sweet family." Celeste froze. Could it be her children? She followed the women discreetly, listening to their conversation. Though they didn't mention names, their descriptions matched Amara and the others perfectly. Overcome with guilt, Celeste resolved to find them. But as she stood outside the bakery later that evening, watching the warm light spill from its windows, fear gripped her. What would she say? How could she face them after all she had done? Unable to gather the courage, she turned away, vowing to return when the time was right. Inside the bakery, Amara worked tirelessly, unaware that her mother was just a few feet away, watching her with longing and regret. Amara's days were filled with work at the bakery, her evenings at David's carpentry shop, and late nights helping Liam with schoolwork. Yet she couldn't shake the idea of night school. Every time she heard Mrs. Hazel talk about the classes, her heart quickened with longing. One evening, after tucking Liam and Eliana into bed, Amara found herself standing by the window, staring at the dark sky. The promise of change hung in the air, and the idea of a brighter future became a beacon she couldn't ignore. "Amara," David said as he entered the room, wiping sawdust from his hands, "I've noticed you've been restless. What's on your mind?" Amara hesitated, then decided to speak the truth. "I want to go back to school. I want to learn more so I can do more for my siblings." David's eyes softened. "You're wise, Amara. If you need help, I'll be here. It's time you had a chance to grow, too." Amara felt the weight of his words sink in, pushing her forward. With David's support and Mrs. Hazel's encouragement, she made up her mind. The next day, Amara walked to the local community center and enrolled in the night school program. As she filled out the paperwork, a sense of excitement washed over her. This was the first step toward a future where she wasn't just surviving but thriving. Weeks passed, and Amara adjusted to her new schedule. Night school was difficult, but she loved every moment of it. The classroom was filled with people of all ages, all seeking a new start. One evening, as she was leaving class, a figure standing at the entrance caught her attention. It was Celeste, her mother. Amara's breath caught, her heart racing as memories flooded back. Celeste's eyes were red, and her hands trembled as she took a step forward. "Amara," Celeste whispered. Amara's first instinct was to run, to disappear into the night. But something inside her stopped her. She stood, staring at her mother, who seemed so small and broken. "What do you want?" Amara asked, her voice low but steady. Celeste's eyes filled with tears as she took a shaky breath. "I need to talk to you. I need to apologize." Amara's anger flared, but beneath it was a deep ache. Memories of abandonment, loneliness, and betrayal battled with the hope of seeing her mother again. "Why now?" Amara finally asked, her voice barely a whisper. Celeste's eyes met hers, and for the first time, Amara saw the true weight of her regret. "I made a mistake, and I want to make it right, if you'll let me." Amara stood there, torn between the past and the possibility of healing. Celeste's sudden appearance was like a storm that had come to disrupt their fragile peace. Amara's heart was caught between anger, disbelief, and a longing for the mother she once knew. "Why should I let you back into our lives?" Amara finally said, her voice breaking. "After everything you did?" Celeste's face crumpled. "I was weak, Amara. I let my own desires cloud my judgment. I didn't deserve you or your siblings. But I've been haunted by that decision every day since." Amara didn't know what to say. The pain was fresh, a wound that had never healed. But there was a part of her that remembered the mother who once cradled her to sleep, who whispered stories and wiped away her tears. "What if the others don't want you here?" Amara asked, the question hanging heavy in the silence. "I understand," Celeste said, her voice barely audible. "I'll do whatever it takes to show them that I'm sorry, if they'll let me." Amara took a shaky breath. The decision wasn't just hers. It was theirs, all of them, as a family. She couldn't ignore the hope that perhaps, one day, forgiveness could bloom where only pain had grown. "Come back tomorrow," Amara said softly. "Let's talk to them together." Celeste nodded, the first glimmer of hope in her eyes since she left. Amara turned and walked away, her heart pounding. The road to healing would be long, but for the first time, she allowed herself to believe it was possible. The next morning, Amara woke early, her heart heavy with anticipation. The sunlight filtering through the small window cast a warm glow across the room as she sat on the edge of her bed, trying to collect her thoughts. Today, they would all face the past together. Liam and Eliana were still asleep, their faces peaceful and innocent. Amara leaned down and gently kissed their foreheads. "Today is a big day," she whispered, more to herself than to them. She prepared breakfast, trying to steady her trembling hands. The sound of the door creaking open behind her made her look up, and there was Celeste standing in the doorway, looking lost and unsure. "I'm here," Celeste said quietly, as if saying it out loud could make it more real. Amara nodded, the weight of the moment pressing down on her. "They'll be up soon. Just be patient." When Liam and Eliana finally woke, their laughter filled the room. They ran to Amara, chattering about their dreams. Amara took a deep breath before telling them, "We have a visitor today, someone you might remember." Eliana's eyes grew wide with curiosity. "Who?" Amara glanced at Celeste, who stepped forward, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "Hi, my loves. I'm your mother." There was a stunned silence before Eliana's eyes began to fill with confusion. "Mama." Liam, older and more understanding, stood protectively in front of his sister. "Why did you leave us?" he asked, the question so simple and yet so piercing. Celeste's face fell. "I was wrong, Liam. I made mistakes that I can never undo. But I'm here now, hoping you can forgive me." Eliana's small hands reached out, hesitating before grasping Celeste's. Amara watched, her heart clenching as she realized that maybe, just maybe, there was room for healing. The room was heavy with unsaid words as Celeste sat on the worn couch, her eyes darting nervously between her children. Amara stood at the window, arms crossed, her gaze fixed on the bustling street below. The silence was broken only by the sounds of the city and the distant call of street vendors. Liam finally broke the silence. "How do you expect us to trust you after everything?" His voice was firm, and Amara felt a pang of pride in his strength. Celeste took a deep breath, her fingers fidgeting nervously. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away. I know I don't deserve it. I just want to be here, to show you that I'm different now." Eliana's voice, soft and uncertain, cut through the tension. "Why did you leave us, Mama?" The question hung in the air, raw and painful. Celeste's eyes welled up as she met her daughter's gaze. "I was selfish and afraid. I thought I was following my heart, but I left the most important people behind. I've regretted it every single day." Amara stepped forward, her voice calm but carrying the weight of her experiences. "We've all had to grow up fast because of you, Mama. But we're stronger because of it. We can't forget what happened, but we can decide what comes next. Celeste nodded, the hope in her eyes flickering like a fragile flame. I understand, Amara. I'll be here, no matter how long it takes. If you'll let me, I want to make things right. The room was silent once more, but now there was a glimmer of possibility. The days following Celeste's return were filled with new routines. She helped Amara with the younger siblings, gradually regaining their trust through small acts of kindness. It wasn't easy, and there were moments when the pain of the past threatened to pull them back into old patterns. But slowly, they moved forward, learning to heal together. Amara continued her night classes, her determination growing stronger each day. The more she learned, the more she realized that education wasn't just for her. It was for her siblings, who deserved a future brighter than their past. Liam excelled in school, his confidence bolstered by his mother's presence, and Eliana, ever curious, began to ask questions about the world beyond their small home. One afternoon, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Amara found herself sitting outside with Celeste. The older woman's hands were rough from years of labor, but they were steady as they rested in her lap. I'm proud of you, Amara, Celeste said, her voice barely a whisper. Amara looked at her mother, really looked at her, and for the first time, she saw more than the woman who had abandoned them. She saw someone who had been lost, searching for redemption. Thank you, Amara replied, her voice shaking. We're all learning, Mama. One step at a time. They sat in silence, the quiet between them no longer suffocating, but filled with the promise of a new beginning. The past could not be changed, but the future was still unwritten. And for the first time in years, hope glimmered on the horizon. Amara's days became a careful dance of work, school, and caring for her siblings. Celeste, despite her past, was committed to proving herself. She spent her mornings at the bakery, learning from Mrs. Hazel and gaining a newfound sense of purpose. With each passing day, her presence grew more comfortable, though trust was still something that needed to be earned. One afternoon, as Celeste swept the bakery's floor, she caught sight of Eliana watching her from the counter. The girl's eyes were wide with curiosity, as if trying to piece together who this woman was and what she meant to her. Do you need help? Eliana asked, her voice small but hopeful. Celeste paused, her heart swelling with emotion. Yes, actually. Would you like to learn how to make cinnamon rolls? Eliana's face lit up. Yes, please. As they worked side by side, Celeste showed Eliana how to knead dough and sprinkle the cinnamon mixture just right. The simple act of baking together felt like a bridge between their past and present, a small gesture that began to chip away at the walls of doubt. Liam, seeing Eliana and Celeste bond, began to soften too. One evening, he approached Celeste after dinner, his voice uncertain. Why did you come back? Celeste knelt beside him, her eyes kind. Because I realized that my greatest mistake was leaving you all behind. I couldn't live with myself anymore. Not when I knew you were out there needing me. Liam met her gaze, searching for signs of truth. And for the first time, he found them. The path to forgiveness was far from easy. There were days when Amara felt like giving up, days when memories of their mother's absence clawed at her heart. Yet, there were small victories too. Times when Liam laughed at an inside joke with Celeste, or when Eliana proudly told Amara, Mama said I'm the best at cinnamon rolls. One night, as Amara sat with Celeste under the pale light of the moon, she found herself asking a question that had been haunting her. Did you ever love us, Mama? Celeste's eyes widened in surprise, then softened as the memory hit her. Every single day. I was afraid I'd lost you forever, but I've never stopped loving you. Amara sighed, the weight of her own pain slowly lessening. We're not the same people we were when you left, Mama. But we can find a way to move forward, if you're willing to keep trying. Celeste nodded, tears of relief streaming down her face. I am. I'll prove to you, to all of you, that I can be the mother you deserve. It was a promise that resonated deep within Amara's heart. The road was long, and the past would never disappear, but the future didn't have to be defined by it. Slowly, piece by piece, they were rebuilding their broken family. With each passing week, the family began to transform. The bakery became a place not just for work, but for shared laughter and stories. Celeste, once hesitant, grew into her role as a caregiver, finding joy in her children's milestones. Amara balanced her studies with newfound confidence, knowing her efforts were creating a better future for them all. One evening, as they sat down for a simple meal of rice and beans, Amara looked around the table. Liam was telling a story about a school competition, Eliana was giggling, and Celeste was watching them with a smile that spoke volumes. The weight of the past had not vanished, but it had become part of a larger tapestry, woven into the present. Liam raised his glass of juice. To new beginnings. They clinked their glasses together, the sound ringing with hope. Eliana added, to family, and Celeste's eyes shone with pride. Amara's heart swelled as she glanced at her siblings, her mother, and the life they were building. It was a life where forgiveness was still a journey, but one they were committed to making. They might not have had the perfect beginning, but they had found their way to a brighter future. One where love, resilience, and a second chance made all the difference. As summer approached, the bakery buzzed with life. Amara's nights at school had become a cherished routine, and Celeste had taken on more responsibilities at home, making their small space feel warm and full of life. The siblings were thriving in their new stability, their laughter mingling with the scent of freshly baked goods and the music of the street outside. One afternoon, as Celeste and Eliana worked on a batch of cookies, Amara sat at the table, her textbooks spread out before her. Liam sat nearby, practicing a math problem with a focused frown. Amara glanced at her brother and saw the determination in his eyes, a mirror of her own tenacity. Liam, when you finish with that, I need you to check the supplies in the storage room, Amara said, her voice gentle but authoritative. He nodded, the movement so quick it was almost a blur. Got it, Amara. Celeste paused and looked up, a hint of pride in her eyes. You're doing an amazing job, she said to Amara. Amara smiled, a blush warming her cheeks. We're all doing our part. Celeste's voice grew soft. And I'm just glad I can be here now to help. The sound of distant laughter drew their attention. Outside, children played near the market stalls, and for a moment, Amara let herself dream of a future where they didn't have to fight so hard for each day. It was a dream built on the simple idea that tomorrow could be better. It wasn't long before old wounds began to resurface. One evening, after a particularly busy day at the bakery, Liam and Eliana sat with Amara, discussing their plans for the summer. The siblings were beginning to talk about their ambitions, and for the first time in a long time, Amara felt hope for their future. Suddenly, Celeste's voice cut through the chatter. Liam, can I talk to you? Liam looked up, his expression guarded. What is it, Mama? Celeste took a deep breath, her eyes darting nervously to Amara, who watched from the corner of the room. I wanted to ask about your father. The mention of their father brought an uneasy silence. Amara stiffened, memories of their childhood flooding back. Their father, a distant and shadowy figure, had left them before they were old enough to form true memories of him. It was one of the reasons Celeste's abandonment had been so devastating. She had been their only constant. Liam frowned, looking at Celeste with eyes that were hard but not unkind. What do you want to know? Celeste hesitated, searching for the right words. I wanted to know if you think about him. If you ever wonder about him. The question hung in the air, laden with pain and curiosity. Amara's chest tightened, but she stayed silent, realizing that the past wasn't just something to be buried. It needed to be faced, piece by piece. I think about him sometimes, Liam admitted. But I don't need to, because I have Amara and Eliana and you now. That's enough. The room grew still, the unspoken words finally settled between them. Celeste's eyes shimmered with unshed tears, and Amara saw her for the first time as both the mother who left and the mother who had come back to try again. The days turned into weeks, and the tensions in the house began to soften. Amara continued to shine at school, her grades improving, a testament to her hard work and the support she now had at home. She was beginning to believe that their lives were no longer defined by the pain of the past, but by the progress they were making. Celeste had begun to volunteer at the local community center, teaching basic baking skills to other women who needed work. Her kindness and willingness to help had started to reshape the community's view of her, and that gave Amara hope. One afternoon, as Celeste was teaching a class, Amara watched from the doorway. The women laughed as Celeste demonstrated how to make the perfect pie crust, and Amara couldn't help but feel a flicker of pride. This was a side of her mother that she had never known, and it was slowly becoming part of the woman she wanted to remember. Liam and Eliana were outside playing with their friends, their laughter blending with the sounds of the neighborhood. Amara's heart felt full, and for a moment, she allowed herself to believe that they were moving forward, not just as a family, but as individuals who were learning to grow from their experiences. That evening, after dinner, Amara and Celeste sat on the porch, the air warm with the promise of summer. The night was clear, the sky a deep shade of blue, and the stars shimmered above them. Thank you, Mama, Amara said softly, her voice breaking the silence. Celeste turned, a small, hopeful smile forming on her lips. For what, Amara? For coming back, Amara said, the weight of those words finally sinking in. It's not easy, but we're trying. And that's enough for now. Celeste reached out and squeezed her daughter's hand, the warmth of her touch a silent promise that, no matter what, they would keep moving forward. The first day of summer brought a new energy to the neighborhood. Children played in the streets, laughter mingling with the calls of street vendors. Amara stood at the counter of the bakery, preparing orders while Celeste guided Eliana through her first attempt at decorating cupcakes. Make sure the icing is even, Eliana, Celeste said, her voice full of encouragement. Eliana's small hands wavered, but she concentrated and followed her mother's instructions. The result was uneven, but it was the most beautiful cupcake Amara had ever seen. Amara chuckled as she watched them. There was a change in the air, a sense of peace that had been missing for so long. The healing was slow, but it was real. Liam came in, holding a crumpled piece of paper. Amara, look at this. It's an invitation for the annual neighborhood fair. They're looking for volunteers, and I thought we could help out. Amara took the invitation, a smile spreading across her face. That's a great idea, Liam. It's time for us to be a part of this community again. Celeste beamed, her eyes shining with pride. Let's do it. It'll be fun, and we can all work together. The idea of working as a family at the fair brought a new excitement. For the first time, Amara felt like they were not just surviving but truly living. The future was uncertain, but there was hope that it would be better than the past. The day of the fair arrived, and the streets were packed with people. Stalls lined the road, colorful tents with games, food, and music creating a lively atmosphere. Amara and her siblings worked together, helping set up their small booth where they sold baked goods and shared stories of their favorite recipes. Celeste stood behind the counter, wearing a bright apron with a sunburst design. We should try making more of the cinnamon rolls, she said to Amara as the scent of warm bread and sugar filled the air. Liam darted around, helping customers while keeping an eye on Eliana, who was busy offering free samples to passerby. Amara's heart swelled with pride watching them. They were not just siblings, but a team. The fair was alive with laughter and joy. There were games to play, contests to win, and a feeling that the past was finally being put to rest. Amara caught a glimpse of Celeste talking with an old friend from the neighborhood, her smile genuine and unguarded. As the sun began to set, the sky turned orange, casting a warm glow on the crowd. A small band began to play, and people gathered to dance in the street. Amara held Eliana's hand as they watched Liam join a group of kids in a playful race. Look at him go, Celeste said, eyes bright with emotion. Amara nodded, her heart full. This is what we've been waiting for, Mama. The fair had come and gone, but its magic lingered in their hearts. That night, as the stars twinkled overhead, Amara sat with Celeste on the porch. The air was cool, and the faint sounds of the neighborhood still pulsed softly. You know, Amara, I never thought I'd be here, watching you all grow up, Celeste said, her voice barely louder than a whisper. Amara looked at her mother, the years of pain and confusion still present, but softened by new memories. It's not too late, Mama. We're still learning about each other, but I'm glad we're doing it now. Celeste's eyes filled with tears that sparkled like the night sky. You're stronger than I ever imagined. And Liam and Eliana, they're amazing. They remind me that love can heal even the deepest scars. Amara's voice grew steady. Love is a lesson we're all learning, one day at a time. For the first time in years, Celeste felt a deep sense of peace wash over her. She knew there would be challenges ahead, moments when the past tried to creep in. But tonight, surrounded by the laughter and love of her children, she understood that forgiveness wasn't just given. It was built brick by brick until it became a foundation. And in that moment, Celeste and Amara both knew they were laying down the first stones of a future that was theirs to shape. As summer gave way to autumn, the changes within their home became more apparent. The days grew shorter, and the gentle rustle of leaves outside reminded Amara of the passage of time. The neighborhood was buzzing with preparations for the Harvest Festival, and Celeste took charge of organizing a special booth that would showcase their baked goods, from cinnamon rolls to the pies that had become an instant hit. Amara and Liam worked on setting up the booth, their movements synchronized and efficient. Eliana, ever curious, kept running up to them with questions about her role in the event. Can I help serve the apple pie, Amara? I promise I'll be careful, she said, her eyes wide with excitement. Amara's heart softened at her sister's enthusiasm. Of course, Eliana. You'll be the best pie server in the entire festival. Celeste was busy in the kitchen, preparing the last of their treats. The air was filled with the sweet scent of apples and cinnamon, mingling with the earthy aroma of fall. Amara watched her mother, seeing the dedication in her every movement, and realized that this was how healing began, through actions that spoke louder than words. As the festival started and the streets filled with music and laughter, Amara felt a sense of belonging. They were a part of something larger now, a community that had once felt so distant. The festival was not just an event. It was a symbol of their fresh start, a testament to their resilience. The night of the Harvest Festival was alive with joy. Stalls lined the streets, and the air was filled with the sounds of laughter and music. Amara glanced over at Celeste, who was helping Eliana hand out slices of pie. It was a sight that filled her heart with warmth, a stark contrast to the emptiness she once felt. Amara's mind wandered for a moment to their old house on the hill, now dark and forgotten. It was a place that held so many memories, both good and bad. The pain of their abandonment was not something that could be erased, but it was something that could be understood. Amara knew now that healing meant accepting the past and choosing to move forward despite it. Liam approached her, holding a cup of cider and looking out over the festival. "This is nice, isn't it?" he said, the corners of his mouth curving into a rare smile. Amara nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "Yeah, it is. We deserve this." The music shifted to a slow, gentle tune, and Amara watched as Celeste pulled Eliana close, swaying with her to the rhythm. It was a moment of quiet beauty that reminded her of how far they had come. Forgiveness wasn't just a word. It was a choice made daily, a commitment to build something better. "Do you think we'll always be like this?" Liam asked, breaking her thoughts. Amara reached out, squeezing his hand. "We'll keep learning, Liam. And that's enough." As winter approached, the first hints of frost painted the edges of the windows with a delicate, icy touch. The family was settled into their new routine, each day filled with a sense of purpose. Celeste continued to run the bakery, her hands now strong and sure as she worked the dough, the lines of her face softening with each smile that crossed her lips. Amara had taken on extra responsibilities at school, her leadership skills making her a figure of respect among her peers. Liam was thriving, excelling in his classes, and even taking an interest in sports. Eliana, with her boundless energy and charm, brought laughter into their home every day. One evening, as snow began to fall outside, Amara sat by the window, watching the soft flakes dance in the moonlight. Celeste joined her, wrapping a blanket around both of them. "Do you ever think about what could have been?" Celeste asked, her voice tinged with a mix of sadness and hope. Amara took a deep breath, the question stirring memories she had long pushed away. "Sometimes," she admitted. "But I think I'm more focused on what is. We have now, Mama. And that's enough to start a new story." Celeste's eyes glistened with unshed tears, and she nodded, holding Amara tighter. "Thank you for letting me be a part of it." The past was not forgotten, but it no longer had the power to define them. The family's story was far from over. It was still being written, one chapter at a time, with forgiveness, love, and resilience as its words. And though they knew there would be challenges ahead, for the first time in a long while, they were ready to face them together. The days grew shorter, and winter's chill seeped into the cracks of their small home. The streets were dusted with snow, turning the world outside into a wonderland of white. Amara and her siblings spent their evenings huddled together, sharing stories and dreams that reached beyond their current circumstances. The warmth of their togetherness kept the cold at bay, even as the wind howled outside. Celeste continued to strengthen the bonds between them, making sure that their evenings were filled with laughter and light. She'd prepare hot cocoa, adding a pinch of cinnamon for a touch of sweetness, and they'd gather around the small, crackling fire, their faces illuminated by its glow. One evening, as Amara watched Eliana play with a new handmade toy, she felt a sudden pang of longing. Memories of days past came flooding back, the times when they had nothing, not even each other's laughter to hold on to. But then her eyes met Celeste's, and she saw the quiet determination in her mother's gaze. It was a reminder that, despite everything, they had found each other again. "Amara, can you help me with my homework?" Liam asked, his voice cutting through the stillness. "Of course, Liam," Amara said, getting up to join him. They sat side by side at the small table, the weight of their shared past pushed aside by the promise of the future. Outside, snow continued to fall, blanketing the world in its peaceful silence. Inside, their home was alive with warmth, a testament to their journey and the love that now held them together. The holiday season brought with it a flurry of activity. The bakery was filled with the rich scent of holiday treats, gingerbread, peppermint, and the unmistakable warmth of freshly baked bread. Amara had been helping Celeste prepare the special holiday orders, while Eliana made paper snowflakes that adorned the windows. The entire neighborhood was aglow with lights, and a sense of joy seemed to hang in the air. One evening, as Celeste was arranging a tray of peppermint cookies, a knock at the door startled them. Amara looked at Celeste, who wiped her hands on her apron before answering. When she opened the door, a figure stood in the light, a man with weathered features and a hesitant smile. Amara's heart pounded in her chest. She recognized him instantly. "Hello, Celeste," the man said, his voice low and careful. Celeste's expression shifted, caught between shock and a tentative recognition. "Sam," she whispered. Amara watched the scene unfold, the air thick with tension and unanswered questions. Sam was their father, a ghost of the past who had left them long before they could remember. Now, standing at their door, he seemed smaller, a shadow of the man he once was. "Can I come in?" he asked, eyes searching Celeste's face. For a moment, silence reigned. Then, with a nod, Celeste stepped aside, allowing him to enter. The room seemed to shrink as he sat down, the flickering firelight casting long, wavering shadows on the walls. Amara exchanged a glance with Liam, whose eyes were guarded, and Eliana, who looked between the adults with wide, curious eyes. The past was knocking once more, but this time, they were no longer afraid. The room was silent, save for the crackling of the fire. Sam sat in the armchair, his gaze shifting between Amara, Liam, and Eliana, and finally resting on Celeste. The years seemed to have carved deep lines into his face, but there was a softness in his eyes that spoke of regret. "Why now?" Amara's voice broke the silence, steady but edged with suspicion. "Why after all these years?" Sam's lips pressed into a thin line, and he looked at Celeste. "I didn't know how to come back. I was afraid of what I'd find, what I'd lost." Celeste took a deep breath, her fingers clenching around her apron. "You left us, Sam. You made your choice, and it hurt more than I can say." The air was heavy with the weight of unspoken truths. Liam stood at the edge of the room, arms crossed, eyes narrowing. "What do you want from us now?" he asked, the question sharp and clear. "I don't expect forgiveness," Sam said, his voice breaking. "I just wanted you to know I'm sorry. I know it doesn't change the past, but I couldn't go another day without trying to make amends." Eliana, who had been watching the scene unfold with innocent curiosity, stepped forward. "I don't know what you did, but Mama says that everyone makes mistakes. Can you stay?" The room fell silent, the question hanging in the air like a fragile promise. Sam's eyes shone with tears as he looked at Eliana, a mixture of regret and hope within them. Celeste's voice, soft and resolute, spoke next. "We'll see, Sam. It won't be easy, but we're all here now. And maybe that's enough to start." Amara looked at her siblings, their faces a mix of confusion and cautious optimism. The past could never be changed, but it could be acknowledged, and from there, they could choose to move forward. The days following Sam's unexpected visit were filled with tension. Celeste threw herself into the bakery, as if working through her emotions one dough at a time. Amara, ever observant, watched her mother, noting the slight tremor in her hands as she rolled out pastries. Liam was more withdrawn, his guarded nature returning with full force. Eliana, sensing the change but not fully understanding it, clung to Amara for reassurance. Sam visited the house daily, each time met with cautious glances and hesitant words. He brought gifts, old toys he'd somehow kept, handmade crafts, even letters he'd never sent. It was clear that the man before them was a shadow of the one who had walked out so many years ago, but whether that shadow held the potential for redemption was yet to be seen. One afternoon, as snow fell gently outside, Sam found himself in the kitchen with Celeste, their shared silence more telling than words. "I don't expect you to forgive me," he said, his voice a low murmur. "I've spent years regretting the choices I made, but now I want to help make things right, even if it's just one small step at a time." Celeste didn't respond immediately. Instead, she watched the way his fingers fidgeted with the hem of his worn coat, the hesitation that spoke of a man unsure of his welcome. Finally, she nodded, a tiny, imperceptible movement. "I'm not sure if forgiveness is something I can give right now, Sam. But we can try." As weeks turned into months, the harsh winter thawed into the promise of spring. The children had begun to adapt to their new reality. Celeste, with Sam's help, worked harder to restore a sense of normalcy. The bakery was thriving, bustling with customers eager for the taste of comfort. Sam worked side by side with Celeste, learning recipes, kneading dough, and quietly earning back the trust of those who remembered his absence. Amara found herself watching the two, the tension in her chest gradually easing as she saw glimpses of the man who had once been her father. There were small moments, a shared laugh between Sam and Eliana, the way Liam would sneak glances at Sam before quietly passing him the flour. Proof that something was shifting. One evening, after closing up for the night, Sam and Celeste sat in the dim light of the kitchen, the silence not uncomfortable, but familiar. "Do you think they'll ever forgive me?" Sam asked, voice rough with emotion. Celeste sighed, her eyes softening as she met his gaze. Forgiveness isn't something that comes overnight. It's something that builds layer by layer. But we're here, Sam. And that's more than we had a few months ago. As the first blooms of spring began to show, so did the soft hope of mending what had been broken. The future was still uncertain, but for the first time in years, it was filled with possibility. Spring arrived, carrying with it a sense of renewal. The days grew longer, and the small home was filled with laughter and the fresh scent of flowers. Amara noticed that Celeste seemed lighter, her eyes brighter as she watched Sam try to engage with each of them. The house was still filled with questions, the past looming in the background, but there was also a new warmth growing in its place. One Saturday morning, Liam came running into the kitchen with a piece of paper clutched in his hand. "Amara, look at this," he said, his voice bursting with excitement. It was a flyer for a local youth competition, one that offered a scholarship for talented students. Amara's eyes widened as she read it. "This could be your chance, Liam." "Really? You think I could win?" His face shone with hope. Before Amara could reply, Sam stepped forward. "I'll help you with practice, Liam. If you want, we can start today." The offer was small, but it was significant, a sign that he was here to stay and make an effort. Liam looked at Sam, his hesitation giving way to trust. "Okay," he said slowly. "Let's do it." Celeste watched from the doorway, her expression a mix of pride and relief. For so long, she had doubted if this day would come, but now she could see that the steps they were taking were leading them forward. Amara felt a flicker of hope that sparked brighter with each passing day. The past could not be undone, but they had chosen to start anew. And that in itself was the greatest gift of all. The days grew warmer, and the family found themselves immersed in the rhythm of spring. The mornings were filled with the sound of birdsong, and the scent of wildflowers mingled with the smell of fresh bread that always seemed to hang in the air. Amara had taken it upon herself to help Liam practice. For the youth competition, balancing her schoolwork with his sessions. Their evenings were a blend of laughter and determination, with Sam helping to coach and Celeste baking energy-boosting snacks. One afternoon, after a particularly challenging practice, Liam stood at the edge of the field, breathing hard as sweat trickled down his brow. "I don't know if I can do this," he muttered, his voice wavering. Amara crouched beside him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. "You can, Liam. You've come so far already." Sam, who had been watching from a distance, stepped forward. "Hey, I know how tough this is. I used to be where you are, afraid to take that final step. But you're not alone, Liam. You have your family." The look of encouragement in Sam's eyes surprised Liam, and for the first time, the boy believed it. The air felt lighter, and Amara could almost hear the bonds forming between them, stronger than the fractures of the past. Celeste stood at the edge of the garden, her eyes watching with a mixture of hope and nostalgia. The past few months had shown her that while forgiveness was a long road, the journey was worth it. And as she looked at the three children and Sam, she realized that new bonds were being formed, ones that would carry them forward into a new chapter. The competition day arrived with a bittersweet buzz. The entire neighborhood seemed to have gathered in the town square, the excitement palpable as families set up blankets and children played games. Liam's heart pounded in his chest as he took his place on the makeshift stage. Amara stood by his side, her hand on his shoulder, while Celeste and Eliana waited at the edge of the crowd. Sam watched with a mix of pride and anxiety, the memory of what he'd left behind pressing on his mind. The announcer's voice boomed through the square, calling for the next contestant. Liam took a deep breath, glancing at his family before stepping forward. As the music began, he let the nervousness melt away, focusing instead on the crowd's cheers and the steady beat of his heart. It was more than just a performance. It was a chance to show himself what he was capable of, to prove that he could rise above doubt. As the final notes echoed through the air, Liam felt a rush of accomplishment. The applause was louder than he could have imagined, and the pride in Amara's eyes was enough to make his heart swell. Sam stepped forward, clapping his hands and giving Liam a thumbs up. "You did amazing," he called, the raw emotion in his voice palpable. The joy in Liam's smile was brighter than any victory. It was the realization that he was no longer alone in his journey, that his family, new and old, stood behind him. As summer approached, the warmth of the season seemed to seep into the corners of their lives, bringing with it new opportunities. Liam's success in the competition had ignited a spark, not just in him, but in the entire family. He was more confident, more willing to try new things, and Sam had become a constant presence, offering guidance and support. Celeste's bakery was busier than ever, and even Amara found herself smiling more often, her days filled with the laughter of her siblings and the quiet moments of shared contentment. One afternoon, as Amara walked into the kitchen, she found Celeste sitting at the table, staring at an old photograph. It was a picture of the family from long before the abandonment, before the heartbreak. The edges were frayed, the faces worn, but it was a piece of their history. "Do you ever look at it and wish for things to be different?" Amara asked, her voice soft. Celeste looked up, her eyes meeting Amara's. "Every day. But I also know that what we have now is worth more than what we lost." Amara sat down beside her, the past no longer a barrier but a reminder of how far they had come. "I think I understand now, Mama. Forgiveness is in the moments we choose to love each other, even when it's hard." Celeste's eyes glistened as she reached for Amara's hand. "You're right, my love. And we've built something beautiful from the broken pieces." Outside, the sound of laughter floated in through the open window. Eliana ran by, her giggles ringing out as she played with Liam. The sun was high in the sky, and the world seemed brighter, filled with the promise of more days like this. Days where they could just be together. The heat of summer settled over the small town, turning the days into long stretches of golden light and laughter. The family's bond deepened with each passing day, and Celeste found herself watching the children with a sense of gratitude she hadn't known she was capable of. Sam, now a permanent part of their lives, had been working tirelessly with Celeste in the bakery and spending more time with Liam, teaching him about the art of making bread. Amara spent her afternoons at the market, selling the bakery's signature pastries alongside Celeste. The older women who ran stalls nearby would offer her warm smiles, their words kind as they noticed the change in her. Amara's laughter was brighter, her confidence radiating as she greeted the customers. It was the sound of resilience, proof that the past, as painful as it had been, was becoming a distant echo. One evening, after closing for the night, Celeste sat on the porch with Sam, both of them gazing out at the orange-tinged horizon. It had been a long road back to this place of peace, one that had been paved with forgiveness and determination. "Do you think they'll ever know the truth?" Sam's voice broke the silence. Celeste's eyes softened. "They know what matters now. And that's enough. The rest, it's for us to bear." As the stars appeared, their soft light sprinkled across the sky, the past felt like a weight that had been lifted. They had made it through the storm, and now, the quiet afterglow was a reminder that healing was possible, even for the most broken hearts. The town's annual summer festival brought with it an energy that was impossible to resist. Streets were lined with vendors, the air filled with music, and children's laughter echoing in every corner. It was a day for celebration, for memories that would last a lifetime. The bakery was decorated with ribbons and flowers, welcoming festival-goers with the warm, familiar scent of baked goods. Amara and Liam helped Celeste arrange trays of pastries, their hands busy but their hearts light. Sam was nearby, chatting with the other bakers and learning more about their stories. Amara caught his eye and smiled, a look of understanding passing between them. No longer was he a stranger, but a part of their family's tapestry. As the sun set, casting a warm glow over the festivities, Celeste called everyone together. They stood under the glow of lanterns, the music swelling around them. "To new beginnings," Celeste said, raising her glass, her voice strong and unwavering. "To new beginnings," the family echoed, their voices mingling with the cheerful shouts of the crowd. Amara stood beside Liam and Eliana, her heart full as she watched them dance, their joy as bright as the stars above. Sam took Celeste's hand, and they exchanged a look of quiet contentment. In that moment, the past no longer seemed so daunting. They had built something lasting, something beautiful, despite everything that had come before. Summer gave way to the first whispers of fall, the leaves turning brilliant shades of gold and amber. The small town was transformed, the crisp air carrying with it the scent of cider and bonfires. The bakery was busy, customers seeking out the warm, spiced flavors that had become synonymous with the changing season. One afternoon, Amara found herself in the kitchen, kneading dough with a rhythmic motion. Sam stood nearby, helping with the preparation of apple pies, while Liam and Eliana worked on a craft project at the table. Celeste moved between them, the warmth of her presence tying the family together. "Amara, can I show you something?" Eliana asked, tugging on her sleeve. Amara leaned down as Eliana handed her a drawing, colored with care and crowned with a big, bold heart in the center. "It's us, Mama, happy and together," Eliana said, her eyes shining with innocence. Amara's breath caught, a swell of emotion rising within her. It was a simple drawing, but it spoke volumes of their journey. How far they had come from the broken, scattered pieces of the past to this present moment filled with love and laughter. "Thank you, Eliana," Amara whispered, her voice trembling. She glanced at Celeste and Sam, who were watching with gentle smiles. They had weathered storms, endured the unspeakable, but in that kitchen, surrounded by the hum of life, they had found their greatest reward, each other. And as the last rays of summer faded into autumn, Amara knew that this was only the beginning of a new chapter, a story of redemption, love, and the unwavering bond of family. The autumn breeze whispered through the open windows, carrying with it the scent of fallen leaves and the distant crackle of bonfires. It was a season of change, and for the family, it felt like they were experiencing it all at once. Sam had found a small house on the outskirts of town, a cozy place with white walls and a porch that overlooked a field of wildflowers. It was a place where new memories could be made, where the past was no longer a shadow but a lesson. Celeste stood on the porch, watching as the children played in the yard, their laughter ringing through the crisp air. The past few months had been a whirlwind of joy and work, with the bakery thriving and their lives taking on a new rhythm. Sam had become an irreplaceable part of their lives, helping to build not just the house, but a sense of trust and hope. Amara approached, carrying a basket of fresh apples from their new garden. "Mama, I think we should have a bonfire tonight. It'll be our first real night in the house," she said, her eyes bright with excitement. Celeste nodded, her heart full. "That's a wonderful idea. We have so much to celebrate." As the night fell and the family sat around the crackling fire, sharing stories and roasting marshmallows, Sam looked at each of them, a soft smile on his face. For the first time, the weight of guilt and regret felt lighter. The future was no longer a question mark. It was an invitation. And as they sat together, the warmth of the fire matched the warmth that had taken root in their hearts. The days turned into weeks, and as the chill of fall deepened, so did the bond between them. Amara continued to help Celeste with the bakery, her skills growing sharper as she learned the art of perfecting recipes and welcoming customers. Liam took up gardening, planting flowers and vegetables with a newfound passion. Eliana, ever the dreamer, spent her afternoons drawing in her sketchbook and telling tales of the family's adventures. But there were still moments where old wounds threatened to resurface. One afternoon, as Sam and Celeste were cleaning up after a busy day in the bakery, Sam's expression grew thoughtful. He caught Celeste's eye, a hint of regret still lingering in his features. "I never told them why I left," he said, his voice heavy. "Do you think they'd understand?" Celeste paused, the question hanging in the air between them. "They might not forgive you right away, Sam. But they need to hear the truth. They need to know that the past wasn't just black and white." Sam looked out the window at Liam, who was helping Eliana build a makeshift fort in the yard. There was no denying that he had hurt them, that he had left them to fend for themselves. But the man he had become was no longer the same one who had made that choice. That evening, as the family gathered around the table for dinner, Sam spoke up. His voice was steady but filled with emotion. "There's something I need to tell you all," he said, meeting each of their eyes. The room fell silent, the air charged with anticipation. Sam took a deep breath, the weight of his confession pressing down on him. The family leaned in, their expressions a mix of curiosity and caution. Celeste reached for Sam's hand, a silent show of support that anchored him in the moment. "I left because I thought I was doing what was best for all of us. I was young, foolish, and afraid of the responsibilities I didn't feel ready for. I thought that if I left, I would find the answers I needed, the strength to become the man I wanted to be. But I was wrong. I should have stayed, no matter how hard it would have been," Sam said, his voice cracking as he spoke. Amara's eyes were wide, the shock clear in her features. Liam's brows furrowed, his lips pressed into a thin line as he listened. Eliana clutched her sketchbook to her chest, sensing the weight of the moment, even if she didn't fully understand it. "I don't expect forgiveness," Sam continued, tears glistening in his eyes. "I only want you to know that I have always regretted leaving you, and that I will spend the rest of my life trying to make it right." Silence hung over the room, the only sounds being the crackle of the fireplace and the soft rustling of the leaves outside. Celeste squeezed Sam's hand, her eyes meeting his with a mixture of sadness and hope. Amara's gaze softened, and she reached out to Liam, their fingers intertwining. The truth was not a balm that healed instantly. It was a path to understanding, one that would take time to walk. But for the first time, the family felt as though they were moving forward, not just together, but as a whole. And that was a beginning worth more than words could say. The days that followed Sam's confession were a mixture of emotions. The children were processing the revelation, their reactions varied. Liam was thoughtful, taking long walks around the fields, while Eliana clung to Amara, sensing the shift but not quite understanding it. Amara herself was torn between anger and understanding, unsure of how to reconcile the pain of the past with the man who now stood before her, offering only remorse and the hope of redemption. Celeste, ever the pillar of strength, focused on keeping their world steady. The bakery thrived, and her days were filled with laughter and baking. But there were moments in the quiet of the evening when she would find herself staring out at the setting sun, the past whispering to her in the silence. Sam often caught her gaze and, without words, would reach out, letting her know he was there. The bond they shared had been tested, but it was resilient. One evening, as the fire crackled in the hearth, Amara approached Sam. He sat with his back to the warm glow, staring at the dance of the flames as if they might hold the answers he sought. "Sam," she said, her voice steady but guarded, "do you really think you can make it right?" Sam turned to her, eyes filled with sincerity. "I don't expect to fix everything overnight, but I will try. I'm here to stay, no matter how long it takes to earn your trust." For a moment, Amara was silent, the weight of his words settling over her. She didn't have the answer, but she felt a small shift, a possibility of healing where there had been only doubt. As the leaves turned from gold to red, the small town prepared for the annual harvest festival, a celebration of the bounty that the earth had provided. It was a time of gratitude, a reminder that life was a cycle, and new beginnings could emerge even from the most unlikely places. The family decided to join in, embracing the festive spirit and welcoming the chance to create new memories. Amara and Celeste worked together to create a display of their finest pastries, while Liam and Eliana helped set up lanterns around the garden. Sam pitched in wherever needed, hauling baskets of apples and helping with decorations. The festival was more than just an event. It was a symbol of the renewal that had been taking root within them all. The evening of the festival was marked by music, laughter, and the soft glow of lanterns that lit up the night. The children ran through the yard, their faces painted with joy. Celeste stood beside Sam, watching as the past seemed to dissolve into the background, replaced by moments of pure happiness. Amara caught her mother's eye and smiled, a small but genuine expression that spoke more than words ever could. It was a moment of peace, a glimpse of what life could be when forgiveness was given a chance. "Thank you for staying," Celeste whispered to Sam, her voice steady, but her eyes shone with unshed tears. Sam squeezed her hand and whispered back, "Thank you for giving me that chance." As the nights grew colder, the family spent more time together in the warmth of the house, wrapped in blankets and sharing stories by the fire. One night, as the crackling flames painted shadows on the walls, Liam spoke up. He was sitting cross-legged on the rug, looking up at Celeste with a question in his eyes. "Mama, why did you leave us before?" His voice was small but unyielding. Celeste took a deep breath, the memory sharp as a knife. "It was the hardest thing I ever did, Liam. I thought I was protecting you, but I was wrong. I let fear guide me, and I left you when you needed me most. But leaving was not a decision made lightly, and it was one that haunted me every day." Liam listened, his eyes wide, absorbing every word. "I didn't understand before. I thought you just didn't care." "I do care, and I always have," Celeste said, the regret in her voice palpable. "And I spent years trying to find a way to make it right. You, Amara, and Eliana, you're the reason I kept going." Amara shifted, the weight of her own doubts easing as she watched Liam's face. "We know, Mama," she said softly. "We know you tried. And maybe that's what matters." There was a pause, a moment of understanding that hung in the space between them. For the first time in a long time, the past no longer felt like an insurmountable wall. Instead, it was a chapter in their story, one that was closed but not forgotten. And as the fire crackled and the night deepened, they knew that they were finally moving forward together.